Do we want to get into some contenders? Sorry for the segue, Cleveland.
Let's talk about the Suns.
Let's talk about the Suns, shall we? The Philly game was a very good basketball game, first and foremost. I was intrigued by the way they attacked late in the fourth quarter because they just spanned and backpicked their way into matchups to get Harden and Embiid and pick and roll. And they just went after them over and over and over and over again. That was just fascinating to me. Also, Devin Booker is really good at basketball.
Devin Booker is very good at basketball, and the Suns are very good at basketball. I feel like or at least I know I've been a broken record all year, but the way this team just has this mindset and the ability to adjust and just take what you do and turn it against you, it's just been such an impressive run. I felt like that was such a good back and forth game just from the mental aspect. Like we've talked about it on this pod, who's switching Harden and Embiid pick and roll? Oh, Phoenix.
And they did to that point. Like, how do you feel? This is a Philly question, to be clear, but like, how do you feel about that balance between those two when there is a switch? Because I found myself kind of raising my brow at the amount of times that Harden got the switch and then Embiid's ready to post up. And Harden is like, no, I got it. Actually, let me take DeAndre Ayton. And Embiid retreats to the dunker spot and kind of chills. And it turns into a dribbling exhibition. And Harden either gets the shot or he doesn't and tries to force a pass late in the clock to someone. And like, I didn't see any visible frustration from Embiid. There was a possession in that game where like Tyrese Maxey's, he tosses his arms up and he's like, hey, what's going on here? Like, give it to the big fella, which I got a good cackle out of that one. But where are you at on that balance? Has that popped up on your radar at all?
No, just because most teams haven't dared do it. So I think they needed to see the reps to understand. I think there were moments where you could see the vision of why teams don't do it. I think there were moments where James was going for the ISO and Embiid wasn't quite sure where to space in that dunker spot. So he might have been in the way of the drive. Because technically, if you line up on the same side as James, your man has to help, but that passing it wasn't quite the same. And I felt there were times where, you would see them hit the post and Phoenix would have to help and you'd open up a three and that's like, oh, that's why you guys don't do that. So I think it's more of just a timing, chemistry, get more of a look at it type deal than anything else. I mean, I thought it was interesting that Phoenix had made James Harden guard Shamet. But yeah, back to Phoenix and just how good they've been. Like, do you find yourself running out of things to say? Because I'm in the space where their regular season has been so good that I'm not even like, let's say they do fall apart. There's no slander coming from me.
Like, I think the only thing that can stop them is poor health. And even with that, Devin Booker's missed time this year. DeAndre Ayton's missed time this year. Chris Paul has missed time this year. They've won 80% of their games. Cam Johnson is still out. And we talked about him not too long ago about the steps that he was making during the Paula stretch. They're winning the title if they're relatively healthy. Like, we could get into the micro. Like, I've really enjoyed this DeAndre Ayton. I've enjoyed this DeAndre Ayton season, period. Shame on the Suns for not maxing that guy in the offseason.
Do you make the trade-off if you get this season, though?
Like, do we believe that they're getting this season because he doesn't have the money?
Hey, you never know.
I mean, I guess you don't know. But, like, we saw this during the postseason. Like, on one hand, I get the bet.
Not this. We didn't see this.
I mean, we saw him turn the corner in the second half of last season, and then throughout the postseason, it was the seals, it was the defensive activity. Like, you saw the outline of this. you're right. He has taken another step because he's shooting like 60% in floater range this year, which is just insane. What he's doing on the short roll is, we didn't see that last season. We saw glimpses, but now he's just nailing it. Going back to that Minnesota game we were referencing earlier, he shredded him. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say here's my big difference with Phoenix this season. So the execution was there last year. We can agree on that, right?
Yes.
It's the decision making and the tempo they have in the half court. So even a possession to the Philly game, fourth quarter, you mentioned how much they ran Spain pick and roll. Philadelphia does a good job of sitting on it. The action's done. Plays out. They swing it to DeAndre Ayton. He's at the elbow. He swings it to Chris Paul. He goes right into another pick and roll. Before the defense can really fully recover, they're right back in the same danger zone.
Yep.
And that to me is the difference, where yes, we have our actions that can hurt you, and yes, we can execute, but if we don't, we are also going to continue to force you to guard and keep putting pressure on you in those ways. And that little step, I think, has been good, and it makes it tough to guard depending on what scheme you want to go with, because hey, we can hurt your switches, we can hurt you in drop, we can hurt you at the level. Now, it'll be interesting to see if there's a team that just decides, hey, we're going to pick this poison, and we're going to take that versatility off the table for y'all. And you're just going to have to do this over and over again. But Phoenix has shown they can kind of do that. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I want to be careful not to talk about them as like a perfect team, because I mean, there are things to pick at, but you play drop against them. Chris Paul, Devin Booker are just going to pull up midi you to death. You switch against them. You've talked about this all year long about how good Mikal Bridges has gotten at slipping screens, particularly like early offense transition stuff. DeAndre Ayton is mashing switches now. Devin Booker would just shoot over the top of you if you have a small guy, if he has a small guy on him. And even if he doesn't, he will still shoot over the top of you. And Chris Paul can jab and rip through and annoy you and knock down contested pull-up jumpers still. Like, the one thing that you can kind of test them out on is the blitzing. Like, statistically, they haven't been great at it this season. And then you once again go to the Minnesota game, and they just blitzed them in the second half of that game.
Yeah, it's got to be some scheme versatility. Let's see if I can bother Nekias here, folks. Is Chris Paul the weakest of the links in the big three?
Wow. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dunker Spot. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Podbean, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us. You can find me on Twitter at Nekias. Like, I think the answer is yes, because I think, one, he is easily the player you have the most health concerns with among that three. And beyond that, like, part of Phoenix flowing a little bit better offensively is this shift from Chris Paul being like full-blown table setter this season, and kind of letting Devin Booker flow from that. And as we've seen when Paul's out, Devin Booker can handle higher usage. DeAndre Ayton can handle higher usage. And so, like, again, I worry about Paul there. Defensively, like, he's going to be the smallest guy in your lineup. So, like, there's going to be some inherent mismatch honey that can go on there. Like, I don't think Paul's a bad defender, but you're 6 foot, like, at a certain point, like, that just kind of is what it is. So, like, I think so, but that's also kind of what Phoenix wanted this year, right? Like, you wanted to get to a point to where DeAndre Ayton could develop into that number two, like, putting it within the context of the conversation we had last year and the paint issues that I was bringing up last year. You kind of needed Ayton to grow into the answer to that, because Chris Paul doesn't get to the rim anymore, and he definitely doesn't get to the rim now. And aside from Booker, you needed someone else to be able to do that. And that's why the eye was kind of like on Ayton, on Mikal Bridges, like, which one of you guys can develop enough to where you can supplement what Chris Paul doesn't bring in that area. And so now you get this from Ayton, and it's like, okay, like, if Chris Paul settles into number 3, like, you are cooking with something.
All right, so while we're going to the other side with the Suns, Can a team put Ayton in a tough position in pick and roll? And can a team find the coverages to take Devin Booker out of rhythm? And if those two things happen, does it look different for Phoenix?
I'm trying to think of potential matchups for them. Like, who could jump up? I guess that's where you want to see what if they get the Clippers in the first round, for instance. Like, that's going to be the test. That's going to be the case study for your questions, I feel like, especially if Paul George does come back and he's healthy. I don't think we're going to see Kawhi at this point. But if you do get Paul George back and you get the Clippers in the first round, Ty Lue is absolutely going to junk it up. You're going to see zone. You're going to see two to the ball on Devin Booker. Like, you're probably going to see Paul George on Devin Booker at some point. I think they'll be able to find some coverages that could bother those two.
Yeah, I think if you can make it tricky for Devin Booker and give him different looks and try and take him out of rhythm, whether it's a trap every now and then, go back to drop, throw some switches, just try and throw him off. And now you have the kind of guard that can make Ayton think twice and pick and roll. That's where it gets interesting. But I'm reaching for grasping for straws. That's what I'm trying to say. Just professional speaker into the microphone.
It's what we do here at the Dunker Spot, you know. Phoenix is just, they're so good, man. They are so good. Flipping this to the Philly side of this equation from that game, I already talked about like how they kind of got hunted, but that also brings me to the lineup thing that's been gnawing at me with Philly.
That's a Danny Green take, isn't it?
Matisse Thybulle was in foul trouble for a good portion of the game. And where was Danny exactly in that fourth?
Again, on the floor.
He was on the floor. But again, like, Phoenix was able to kind of dictate what matchups they wanted to go after, and there wasn't much to be done about it from Philly side, didn't look like.
And which portion? What do you mean?
I mean, defensively. I think with Thybulle off the floor, like, they just went after it. Like, they were probably going to try to hunt out those kind of mismatches anyway. But without Thybulle on the floor to kind of fly around and help, at least, I feel like that kind of added to the problems that they had late in that game.
Well, I mean, you had Green on Booker, so I think what Phoenix basically did was say, hey, the rest of y'all got to figure this out, at least for a good stretch. Mm-hmm. And then they were able to play out of those pressure moments. And that's the tricky part when we get to this part of the season, because it's going to be individual matchup season, which is great until teams switch you out of those matchups, or teams decide that's cool, you're going to stay in the corner, everyone else has the guard. Mm-hmm. So that's where it gets a little trickier, because I thought Philadelphia did a pretty decent job with their personnel involved of defending the actions. It's just the play after the play, and sustaining defense. And that's going to be the answer or the question for them down the stretch. Now, I don't know if you're going to face a team that executes at that level, mm-hmm. but again, defensively, you need Maxey and you need Harris to be at a certain level to allow the rest of it to make sense. And if you don't get that, you might run into some problems.
Am I overblowing? I came out of the game a little bit underwhelmed with Maxey defensively. Like, just for that specific, I think, especially when Phoenix would run like a guard screen, because they did a lot of that early in the first quarter, where they'd have Chris Paul screen for Devin Booker just to get the Maxey matchup and then flow into whatever ball screen they want to get into. And Tyrese Maxey, like, physically just couldn't hold up against Booker. And I wonder, like, is there a team in the East that could kind of pose similar issues there?
Well, that's going to be the thing, because technically, if we're talking straight up and down, you need Maxey to be able to do ball pressure type things on whoever the one man is.
Mhm.
So if I'm thinking the way that you're trying to present this, I mean, I guess you'd have to put Brooklyn in there. Just the threat of that could be interesting. Maybe a Chicago on paper.
Mhm.
Milwaukee, depending on how you feel about Middleton. Boston, perhaps, but I think Philly could scheme their way out of that.
Okay.
Toronto, size wise, I guess, could present that. So it's more like I think it's well, because here's the thing: his awareness in switching and covering actions is so important. You need his ball pressure, but once he does the switch and recovers, now you've kind of reversed out of what you were trying to do. You know what I mean? I think that's what Phoenix did that worked so well is Philadelphia's had success when they are able to kind of line things up the way they want to. Like, hey, we got Harden on this guy who does this, Embiid's on the big, Maxi Harris, Danny or Matisse, y'all have y'all matchups, and now we can get out of it. And Phoenix said, that's great. We're gonna make all y'all run around, and now we've flipped it to what we want.
Mhm.
I don't know if the Eastern Conference has that kind of mindset. I think they have the guys who can punish Philadelphia, but I don't know if it's going to be in that same way.
I got you. And I guess that's part of my struggle I had with trying to zoom out from this game because Phoenix did very specific things. Again, like they were able to consistently get Harden and Embiid in action. And sometimes we saw Embiid play at the level, sometimes we saw him in drop. Didn't really see switching from those two, but like we saw what kind of problems they could pose and stuff. But on the other hand, it's just like, okay, who in the Eastern Conference executes like Phoenix does? Nobody. So like how much of that can be replicated as consistently and or as efficiently as Phoenix does it? And so I'm just trying to balance like, okay, like this is a problem, but like how much of a problem is it going to be against like worse teams that Philly's going to face? Like, could they just be able to outlast some of these teams in the East if they try to get picked, if they try to pick on them in the same way that Phoenix did?
Do you feel better about Embiid and pick and roll?
Uh, I'm still in. I feel like I'm in the same place with Embiid and pick and roll. Like I don't feel. Like I certainly don't feel worse about it because we know what he can do when he's fully engaged. Like it's I'm gonna annoy you, but like it's Gobert-esque when he's locked in. Like teams don't even want to take shots in the paint against him. A lot of teams will drive and probe and just pull it back out and hope they can force a late switch on him because they just don't want to challenge him at the rim. So like he can be that menacing force. I think my question more with Embiid is more so like him in conjunction with Tobias Harris. What's that coverage going to look like? And that's more of a Tobias question than an Embiid question. What does him and Harden look like? To circle back to that conversation, like that's more of a Harden question than it is with Embiid. Because I think he's shown over the last year and a half, like when he's engaged, like he can play. He's very, very, very good in drop already. We know that, but like he can play to the level of the screen or a little bit below that if you ask him to do that. I think he wants more opportunities to do that. Honestly, if you listen to him talk, but it's more so about the other guy.